2020 election polling underestimated Donald Trump by 4% nationwide. He was supposed to lose the popular vote by 8.5 percentage points, but in the end, he only lost it by 4.5. And so in this video, we'll be taking a look at the 2024 electoral map if the polls are just as wrong again, and shift the polling averages from every single state 4 points to the right to compensate for this error. We'll begin up in Washington, where polling currently suggests that Kamala Harris is going to win the solid blue state by an 11.3% margin. If we compensate for the 4% error, she'll only win by 7.3. And so Washington is just barely going to scrape by as a likely blue state. Down in Oregon, though, Harris leads by just 5% in the only poll conducted between the two major party candidates in the state. And so Harris up by 5, we adjust this by 4 points, and her lead is down to just 1%. So Oregon is going to be a tilt blue state. We're going to do this all across the map to see how many electoral votes Trump can win if the polls underestimate him again. And so in the home state of Kamala Harris, that of course being California, she leads by 25 points. We only have one poll. She would still win by a solid margin even if the polls are massively wrong. And so the Golden State 54 electoral votes will go to the vice president. Moving on now to the first competitive state on the map, Nevada hasn't voted red since 2004 when George W. Bush defeated John Kerry. In every single election since, Democrats have come out on top in the silver state. In 2016 and 2020, both Clinton and Biden won Nevada by a 2-point margin, but today, Trump is undoubtedly the favorite. He leads by 0.8% and has led in virtually every single poll against Kamala Harris. And so adjusting for this 4-point error, Trump is on track to winning the silver state by a nearly 5-point margin. Now, that is not impossible. Just look at what happened between 2012 and 2016. A state like Iowa went to Obama by nearly 6 points. Trump wins it by nearly 10 points just 4 years later. Iowa shifted 15 points to the right. Trump did very well in the Midwest, and considering that Nevada is a state shifting to the right, with them electing a Republican governor in 2022, it is definitely not impossible that the state actually goes to the former president by a non-tilt margin. Nevada is going to be lean Republican on our map. We see something similar in Arizona, a state that Biden won 4 years ago. It was a very close election, 0.31%. Only Georgia was closer. Today, though, Trump has a narrow lead in the polls. He's up by 0.3% and has led in most of the surveys between him and the vice president. And so with the error being adjusted for, Trump is on track to winning Arizona by 4.3%. He's going to win it back. It's a state that he carried by nearly 4 points in 2016, so a 4-point victory for him again is not at all unlikely. Arizona will be the second state on the map going in favor of the former president, and it's also going to be leaned red. I mean, in a state like Arizona, a state that he lost by such a narrow margin 4 years ago, Trump is not going to have to do too much to win this state back. Joe Biden ran under amazing circumstances for Democrats. The economy wasn't doing the best after a year of COVID, and honestly, the pandemic was the reason why Joe Biden came out on top. Even when he was supposed to win with a 350 electoral vote landslide, according to many observers, he barely won the election. States like Wisconsin, Arizona, and Georgia that got him over 270, they were decided by less than 1-point margins. If he had lost these 3 states, he would have lost the election. Trump is in a much better position today, and that's why he's going to flip so many states this November. Before we continue, only 15% of you guys are actually subscribed, so please take the time to subscribe right now for more content like this leading up to the election in November. And follow me on Twitter for daily political updates. Link in the description below. Moving on to Colorado, we don't have any polling, but Biden was leading by around 7 to 10 points. Harris isn't going to do too much better, considering that Biden did do very well 4 years ago. He won Colorado by nearly 14 points. Go back just 4 years, Clinton carries the state by 4.9. And so adjusting for Harris's probable 7 to 10 point lead if polls are conducted here, we're going to place Colorado into the lean blue column. We also have New Mexico, where we do have a single poll. Harris is up barely by a double-digit margin according to Emerson College and The Hill, and so she'll win by 6 points if the polls underestimate Trump by 4% again. So New Mexico is going to be the second lean blue state on our map. We also have a lot of states in the middle of the country that Trump is no doubt going to win: Utah, Wyoming, Idaho, Montana, North and South Dakota, nearly all of Nebraska, as well as Kansas and Oklahoma. Nebraska would actually be tilt red if we adjusted for the error. And to finish off the western half of the continental U.S. in Texas, these 40 electoral votes are going to be crucial for the former president. If he loses Texas, he loses the election. But luckily for him, no Republican has lost Texas since 1976, when Jimmy Carter won his first term. And so today, polls in the Lone Star State are very favorable for the former president. Trump leads by a double-digit margin. He'll be up by 14 if he is underestimated again. Not quite the 15-point solid state threshold, but still an easy victory for Trump in a state that Democrats thought they could win in 2020. They put hundreds of millions of dollars into Texas, and they still lost it by a nearly 6-point margin. But today, Texas is going to be likely red. It's just barely going to miss out on being safe. In Alaska and Hawaii, obviously, these two states are going to be solid for one party or the other. Hawaii will be solid blue, and Alaska solid red. Moving up to the Midwest now, this is where the election is going to be decided. The states of Minnesota, Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania are crucial for Kamala Harris, and Democrats do have a streak of winning all 4 of these states going back to the 1970s and 80s. However, we do have one exception, and that is 2016. And which Republican ran in 2016? Yes, of course, it was Donald Trump. He flipped all 3 of the blue wall states, Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania, by tilt margins. And this is what won him the election 8 years ago. He lost them by narrow margins in 2020, and that is why Joe Biden was elected. Now in 2024, all he has to do is win 1 out of these 3 states if he wants to get back into the White House. Look at 2016, Trump won 306 electoral votes. He only needed to win 270. And so the most favorable state out of the 4 right now is Minnesota. Kamala Harris leads by 8 points. This is mainly a result of her choosing Minnesota Governor Tim Walz to be her running mate. Walz is popular in his home state, and he is going to provide Harris with a boost here. Harris plus 8. It's going to fall into the lean margin if we adjust for the error, but still a victory for Democrats nonetheless. If Joe Biden had stayed in the race, there was a very good chance he could have lost Minnesota entirely. We don't have any polls from Iowa yet, though, but it's probably going to be safe for Trump in this scenario, and so will Indiana, while Illinois is going to be likely blue. It's a state the Democrats have won by 17 points in all 3 of the last presidential elections. Wisconsin, though, this is going to be a big one. Generally, it is the most conservative out of the 3 blue wall states, and also including Minnesota. It almost always votes to the right of its 3 neighbors, but with Tim Walz as Harris's running mate, people think that she's going to do slightly better in Wisconsin. Now, winning Wisconsin is not enough for Harris. She also has to win Pennsylvania, which right now people believe to be the most conservative out of the 3 in terms of voting this November. However, in Wisconsin, Kamala Harris leads by a 1-point margin. Not the greatest margin considering Biden led by a 6.7% margin when he won the election 4 years ago, but he only won Wisconsin by less than 1%. This is just how much polls have overestimated Democratic support. And so with Harris up by 1%, it honestly is not enough for her to actually win the state. I mean, Hillary Clinton was leading by 11.5 points 8 years ago, and she lost Wisconsin. That is just how wrong the polls here have been. A 1-point lead is nothing the Harris campaign should be happy about, and so adjusting for this error, it's going to go to Trump by a 3-point margin. Wisconsin will be the 3rd lean red state on the map. Harris also has a slight lead in Michigan. She's ahead by 2 points, but again, Clinton led by 9 points here in the end, and the polls also massively overestimated Joe Biden 4 years ago as well. Now, if any of the swing states is going to go to Harris, it's probably going to go to Michigan. It has voted to the left of all the other swing states, and by swing states, I mean Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, along with Nevada, Arizona, North Carolina, and Georgia. If Michigan goes blue, that is no sign that Trump is going to lose its neighbors, but as of right now, Harris is the slight favorite according to the polls, but just like in Wisconsin, it doesn't seem like she's winning by enough, and adjusting for the 4-point error, Trump is actually going to be on track to win by a 2-point margin, and so Michigan will be yet another flip in favor of the former president and another lean red state. In Ohio, though, the former president leads by 8.5%. He'll win by 12.5 if the polls are just as wrong, still within likely territory, but it's a state that, remember, just 4 elections ago went blue. It was a center state for a long time. It was actually a bellwether. It always voted with the presidential election winner until that streak was broken in 2020 when Biden won the election but lost Ohio. Today, it's well within the Republican camp. The Buckeye State will be likely red. And to finish off the Midwest with probably the most important state on the map, Pennsylvania, its 19 electoral votes are going to be crucial for both candidates, and a lot of its importance derives from just its high electoral vote count, but also the fact that it very much is in the center. Looking at the polling today, though, Trump leads by 0.2%. He's led in most of the polls against the vice president. You see basically a wall of red, while only 3 polls have shown Harris ahead. And Quinnipiac, this poll that has Harris up by 3, this was the most inaccurate poll of the 2020 cycle. It overestimated Biden by a huge amount. The New York Times and Siena College did basically the same thing. And so with the adjusted margin, Trump is going to win by just over 4 points. Pennsylvania will be yet another lean red state in the Midwest. Up in the Northeast, many of these races are going to be safe for Harris. Vermont, Massachusetts, Connecticut, Rhode Island, Maryland, and the District of Columbia are all solid blue, while New Jersey and Delaware are likely states. The 1st District of Maine is solid for Harris, and the 2nd District solid for Trump. Taking a look at New York, though, Kamala Harris leads by 14 points. That margin is going to drop down to 10. It's going to be a likely blue state. This is the first time Democrats don't win by a solid margin in the Empire State since Michael Dukakis in 1988, almost 50 years ago. So the Empire State not looking too great for Democrats, but this is mainly a result of their scandals and their poor governance with the resignation of Andrew Cuomo for sexual harassment as governor, and then his replacement Kathy Hochul hasn't been any bit more popular. In the Granite State of New Hampshire, the vice president leads by 5 points. The state is going to go down to a tilt margin in favor of Democrats with that 4-point shift in favor of Trump. This is a state Trump can actually win. Just look at 2016. It was the 2nd closest state in the country, only behind Michigan. Trump lost New Hampshire by less than half a percentage point. And so on the map, it's going to be tilt blue once again. We also have the state of Maine. It's at large vote with 2 electoral votes, where Harris actually leads by a whopping 13 points. This University of New Hampshire poll is no doubt an outlier, but we're just going to go by these numbers. The adjusted margin would be Harris plus 9, and so it will remain in the likely blue category, although it can definitely get significantly more competitive like we saw in 2016 when Clinton didn't even win the state by 3 points. We're left with just the southeastern quadrant now. Many of these states will be safe Republican. Missouri, Arkansas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, Tennessee, Kentucky, West Virginia, and South Carolina are all going to be safe for the former president, while in Virginia, we would actually see another huge flip for Donald Trump. Harris leads by 4%. Adjusting for this error, Trump would take a very narrow lead. And so the Commonwealth of Virginia, which did recently elect a Republican governor in 2021, it's going to vote for the GOP for the first time since the election of 2004. And so Virginia, which has been shifting to the left from 2010 to 2020, although it's come back a little bit towards the right in the last 4 years, is going to vote Republican. Donald Trump would be the favorite in Virginia if the polls are wrong again. I mean, polls had Biden winning by a solid margin 4 years ago. He only won it by 10 points. And with Harris now barely ahead, she really isn't in the best position in the state. The most recent poll only has her up by 3. If Joe Biden stayed in the race, just like in Minnesota, he probably would have also lost Virginia. In North Carolina, we have a state that Trump has never lost before. He won it by 4 points in 2016 and by 1% in 2020. But today, he's ahead by 0.9% in the polls, which is much better than how he was doing 4 years ago. Basically, throughout the entirety of the 2020 election cycle, Biden was the favorite according to the polls. On 530, it's average. There was not a single point in time in which Trump took the lead. And still, he somehow won the state. Just the fact that Trump is ahead right now basically guarantees a victory for him here. Democrats have only won the Tar Heel state once since 1976, and that was Barack Obama in 2008 by a third of a percentage point. Kamala Harris is not going to be the second Democrat to win the state in half a century. So North Carolina is going to be another swing state that will fall in the lean Trump column, while down in neighboring Georgia, this is a state that Biden won by a very narrow margin. It was the closest state of the entire election, but today Trump is ahead here as well. 0.7% is his predicted margin of victory. Georgia is still a red state. They re-elected Republican Governor Brian Kemp by a likely margin 2 years ago, even though he was running against Stacey Abrams, who is basically the best the Democrats have to offer in the peach states. So with a 4-point adjustment, Georgia is also going to be lean in favor of the GOP. And finally, in Florida, this is a red state now. Republicans basically own the Sunshine State. Ron DeSantis was reelected by a 20-point margin in 2022. Marco Rubio reelected by a 16-point margin. There's no way Trump is going to lose a state he didn't even lose in 2020. He actually did better in 2020 in Florida than he did in 2016. The margin went from 1.2% up to 3.4%. Today, the former president leads by 6.3%. I mean, in 2020, Biden was supposed to win Florida. He led basically throughout the entirety of 2020, but in the end, he still lost the state, with Trump now ahead by almost a likely margin. There's no way he's going to lose it, and with the polling adjustment, he's going to win it by a double-digit margin. Florida is going to be likely red. And so if the polls are just as inaccurate as they were 4 years ago, if they overestimate the Democrats by 4% again, Donald Trump is on track to win 326 electoral votes. He's going to flip Nevada, Arizona, Georgia, North Carolina, Virginia, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, and the 2nd District of Nebraska to come out on top with 326 electoral votes, while Harris's performance is the worst of any Democrat since Michael Dukakis in 1988. Thank you guys so much for watching. Make sure you like, comment, and subscribe right now for more content like this leading up to the election in November, and join my Discord server, link in the description below.